Hello, thank you for being here, and thank you for those who are going to watch this presentation later. My name is Francisco Morales. I am the gallery director at the front Arte y Cultura art gallery located in San Isidro, California, right by the border with Tijuana, Mexico, in San Diego. And I'm very happy to have all of you here, and I'm very happy to have our guest speaker tonight, Amanda Cachia. Amanda is a curator, writer, and historian, resident here in San Diego. I think I met Amanda at San Diego Institute a few years ago. We talked briefly, and since then I've been following you, Amanda, and following the work that you do. And I thought you would be great for this series of about curatorial perspectives and those approaches that curators from our region and beyond have, and yeah, basically the way you see the curatorial process. So we're gonna start. Thank you, Amanda. I would like you to please introduce yourself a little bit and then go ahead and start with your presentation.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Francisco, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes or so. And then, of course, if people have questions, you can put them in the chat. Feel free anytime to interrupt me and ask me a question about any of my material. Also, I wanted to just give a visual description of myself because my talk is about curating and disability. And so by describing myself, I'm making myself accessible for people who might be blind or of low vision. So I'm a white person. I have brown curly hair. Today it's tied up on top of my head in a bit of a messy bun, I'm afraid. And I have glasses, black framed glasses. I'm wearing a white t-shirt and a kind of a honey colored cardigan. And behind me is like some sheer drapes and a window. So anyway, so I have been living and working in San Diego now for, I guess, 10 years. I'm originally from Sydney, Australia. And I'm interested in disability related work in curatorial praxis. And that's because I'm somebody who identifies as disabled. I'm a person of short stature. And, you know, when I was growing up and going to art galleries and visiting museums, I was always wondering, why isn't there more representation of people with disabilities? And I started really growing passionate about curating and, you know, working with museums on exhibitions. And I really felt the need to introduce a new perspective, which is why this is such a good series for me to talk about my work. And so I ended up, you know, going to UCSD and pursuing a PhD in art history and focusing exclusively on this topic. And also the last 10 years of my curatorial work has been also exclusively focused on disability and giving opportunities to contemporary disabled artists. And so what I'm going to present for you today actually is some of my, I mean, I have many shows, but this is like a selection, 6 shows. And I don't know if I'll get through all of them, but I'll try. And you can see number 5 and 6, Crip Ecologies and Rescript. They're my latest shows from this year. So hopefully we'll get to those ones. And I think they're the most important to talk about because they're the most current too. So as I'm sharing, you know, my shows with you, I'm going to show you installation shots. I'm going to show you, you know, individual artworks, and I'll just kind of talk to you about my approach. Like, what is it that you know, the themes, the topics, the things that went well, the things that went not so well, because I really want to be, you know, transparent with you about the challenges in this area, of which there are many, by the way. So, you know, again, feel free to ask questions. And so, you know, I think from the beginning, because I decided to do this work exclusively in disability, I felt like, you know, my identity as a curator is one of an activist. Like, I really need to think about why disability hasn't ever been really prominently featured in art history. And mostly when it has been, it's been very reductive, right? It's been really offensive, actually. So how can we turn around those, you know, very poor perceptions of disabled people in images? This is just a drawing by an artist from Romania. And he's really giving us a sense of, well, this is what art practice is today. It's about being an activist. So you're no longer standing, you know, behind the canvas making art. You're actually turning that canvas into a protest sign and saying, yeah, like, let's make some change and some transformation in society. And so I see myself in a very similar way as a curator. And so here's some images from the past, the not so recent past, that in art history, these are images that are really celebrated, these images by really famous photographers, including Diane Arbus. I'm sure many of you have heard of her. And so she's, they've been giving us these images of people of disability that are really limited, I think. So you have like your circus performer, or you have your exotic nude. And I thought, well, where is the perspective of the person who's disabled? What do they think of themselves in taking these images? And so in San Diego at Space for Art, I curated a show at in 2014, where I actually invited photographers who identify as being of short stature to take images of themselves. So, and here is one of the people, actually, he's sitting on his scooter and he's taking, you can see him with the camera. And I thought, this is like a literal, like, here he is taking pictures by himself of himself. It was so important for me to see that. And here's some of his images, actually. And what you'll notice as we're going through them is that they're all taken from his height perspective, because he's 4 foot tall. And so what's really neat about these photos is that, he's cutting off the body of the average height person. And it almost feels like, I find them funny and interesting, but also like acts of revenge. Like he's like, haha, here, like I'm literally like cutting you off, right? Because he gets poor treatment generally from the public. But it's also just showing you like a unique perspective, which we really don't see very often, right? So it's kind of a change, a refreshing change. Anyway, so I start with this show just to say, here's where I'm coming from my own personal perspective as a curator. Anyway, so this is a show that Francisco's familiar with, that I curated also in San Diego, the San Diego Art Institute, which, by the way, is now called the ICA. I think they changed their name to the Institute of Contemporary Art. And so in this show, it was a really big deal for me to curate something where people could come into the gallery and touch absolutely everything, because we know that typically you can't do that. You can't touch anything when you go into a gallery. And I think that's a real shame, because we learn so much from our engagement with art through touching, actually. So why do we always just have to look at it only? Or, in some cases we hear it as well. There's audio art, sound art, but we never really get to touch it, because we know the reasons, because of, safety and because of conservation, et cetera, but it really disadvantages all of us. And it particularly disadvantages people that have disabilities, like especially if you're blind or you're low vision. And then if all you have is the visual aspects of the art, you're really missing out. And so this show, I purposefully designed it for people to touch. And I told all the artists before the show, I said, your work is going to be touched. And so they agreed. So here's like, the first series of works that are this kind of selection of gongs, and they're made out of they're made out of bronze. And so people could come, that's me back in the day when I had short hair. And I'm holding a mallet, and you just ding, you hit these beautiful gongs suspended from the ceiling. and they made the most beautiful sounds, and they really reverberated around the entire gallery, and it was really beautiful. But it was also tactile, right? Because you're holding this, and you could touch the sculptures too, by the way. So it wasn't just hitting them and making sounds, you could touch everything. And then this was the opening, which was fun. And these images here really demonstrate that the work was appealing to everybody. Like, we even hung some of these, you know, we call these bells. We hung them low to the ground so little kids could come and play, and they had so much fun. It was really, really fun. And this is a work that people didn't really notice. So if you go to the entrance of the gallery where they had the intro text, basically if you touch the wall, you could feel the vibration of a cat purring. And so that was so much fun too. All of these people were like laughing hysterically because they thought, oh, this is so cool. And it was like kind of really, you know, for those of you who have cats, you know, you might know that it feels very calming and relaxing when you have a cat on you and you can feel their purring. And so that was having that sensation for people. And this is a work that is also, you know, tactile friendly, but it's also meant to appeal to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So if you can't hear the cat, you can certainly feel them, right? So, and then all the other pieces in this show were tactile friendly. So everything you could touch. This work here was really fragile. It was made from bone china. You could touch it. This one here, people came in and scratched the vinyl records with their car keys. And then at the end, the artist came in from Montreal where he lived, and he played a set with all the scratched vinyl. And the sound was, you know, interesting to say the least. But it was, you know, a cool experiment for him. And all these other pieces also were able to be touched. This one here was fun on the left because it was a smell, like a scent-based experience. So it had like a fragrance and it smelled like grass. So I really liked that one too. This was like synesthesia. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it means like when you have, like, for instance, I'll explain this work, that this is a projection of a woman's face. She's an opera singer. So you could hear the opera singing, but then each time she hit the high notes, her face went bright red. And then when she hit the low notes, her face would change colors. Like it would go to blue, purple. And so the colors would give you an indication of the changing of the notes of the music, which I thought was really cool. And this is where I became more of an activist in a work like this, because this artist here, she gave me a video installation, which was projected on the wall. And I said to her, well, you know, how are people going to access this if they're blind? And so she actually sent me, because she was making a mask on her head out of all this found material in the performance of the video. So she sent me the original materials from the mask in the mail, and I put them on display. So that meant that if you couldn't see that, you could touch it. And then also because it was all this kind of crinkly paper, it was like it was a great sound that was being made too. So it became a really multi-sensorial experience. And this was the same with this work here. So this was a projection of all these kind of abstract shapes on the wall, different colors. But then the artist used a 3D printer, and he created those shapes into three-dimensional form, right? And he put them on these shelves, and then people could come and touch the shapes as well. So I really liked that one a lot. Anyway, so, you know, as much as this exhibition sounds great, and it was great, but I'm going to confess that we had some problems. Sorry, before I tell you my problems, I'm going to say that this is, we worked with the blind community of San Diego. And so we did some workshops with them, and a local artist named Aaron Skellman. He came and did these workshops, and we had this collaborative piece that ended up being up on the wall, and that was really nice. And yeah, it was a great experience. But what I wanted to say, these are the labels. This shows you the Braille, and then this is like the descriptions of all the, you know, the way that you can participate in the show, and it was great fun. but what I wanted to tell you was that we had some, there was some work that ended up being damaged because people came in and they didn't, because once you give people permission to touch, they go crazy. And so they were like, I don't know how to touch. So then they ended up breaking some of the work, which was really unfortunate. So actually the work, let me just go back quickly and show you the work that I showed you at the very beginning, these bells. One person actually came in and swung on one of them, like it was like Tarzan. And he like broke it, like it snapped, like it fell off the ceiling and the whole piece snapped in half. And this is made out of bronze. So for him to do that, it took a lot of persistence. I'm laughing about it now, but believe me, I was not laughing at the time. And so it was really unfortunate. The artist luckily was really understanding and very nice, but people just went crazy, you know. So unfortunately we had to end up telling people to stop touching, which was so sad for me because it kind of ended up being the opposite of what I had intended. But that's what I mean, like I'm trying to share with you all, like here's my experience, this is what we tried to do as an activist and haptic activism and all of that, and then it didn't work out quite the way I wanted to. And then I ended up sitting in the gallery myself, and I sat there for 3 days a week and actually talked to the visitors and tried to teach them how to touch and like explain to them like, oh, this is how you handle objects, this is what you do, this is what the artist's intentions were. So I realized it's like a lot of kind of, because people aren't used to this, you have to train them in a way. And also I needed to be a little bit more careful, I think, next time with my selections of the objects that I perhaps would be giving people permission to touch objects that are not as fragile. Like this one here, I told you it was made out of bone china. So those ones were the ones that also ended up being quite damaged quite a lot. I think the public broke 2 or 3 of those. And the artist in this instance was not as understanding. She was kind of really upset. So anyway, so that was a good lesson for me. And I really am keen in the future to do more experiments in touch. I think it's so important for museums. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next show. In this show was at the University of Toronto in Canada. And the city of Toronto was going to be basically hosting the Pan Am Games and the Para Pan Am Games. So it's kind of like a smaller version of the Olympics. And so they knew that I was a curator that was an expert in disability and thinking about the body, etc. So they invited me to curate a big show in their gallery, which was terrific. And so I called this show The Flesh of the World. And it's taken after a saying in a book by a famous philosopher. His name is Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And he wrote also this book called The Structure of Behavior. And also I was interested in Sarah Ahmed's work in queer phenomenology. So basically these 2 philosophers are interested in kind of challenging the way that we think about movement, the way we think about behavior, the way we think about orientations. Like there's no such thing. They're basically saying there's no such thing as normal, like not such thing as normal movement, normal behavior. And that the disabled body can actually bring important new information that we take for granted, right? And this image has always inspired me. And it's protesters who were basically wheelchair users, and they got out of their wheelchairs and they climbed up the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. To protest against, at the time in 1990, the Americans for Disabilities Act had not yet been passed. And so they were protesting and saying, you know, hurry up, like get your acts together and let's get this act passed, which represents their rights. So I loved that they got out of their wheelchairs and crawled across, you know, this public space. It's pretty radical, you know, and they were like really pissed off. And I just think it's cool, like that they were also challenging, like, you know, the way that we're supposed to move in public. I mean, this is like crawling across public space is not considered acceptable, but they didn't care. And I really liked that a lot. And so And then in history, there's been other people who've done that too. Like this is a still from a film by a Japanese film director about a man who had cerebral palsy, and he did the same thing. This guy used a wheelchair, and he's like, you know what? The wheelchair doesn't really help me. I'm going to get out and crawl. And I really like this kind of challenging the way that we move in space, you know? And so with the show, this is kind of what the show is all about, right? Artists who came in and challenged the way that we think about bodies and movement. And I curated really famous artists into this show. And Hamilton is one. I had Bruce Nauman. I had Stellac, who's really a famous artist that is known for growing an ear in a petri dish and then sewing it to his arm. And so I put these famous artists alongside lesser known contemporary disabled artists because I really wanted them to have that conversation with each other, right? And to also, you know, how do we talk about Bruce Nauman in terms of disability? But let's shake up the way that we talk about these artists, and why can't we, you know, challenge the discourse, basically. This is just another quick artwork example of that really highlights the theme and the topic of my exhibition. And this image is, what you're looking at is a video performance where this woman, Helen Dowling, invited this professional breakdancer, this guy, she invited him to come into a dance studio and dance with her brother. And her brother has cerebral palsy as well. And so she said to him, do you want to learn how to break dance? And he said, well, I'm the professional. I'll teach him. And she said, no, we're going to turn it around. You're going to learn from my brother. And so basically this brother with cerebral palsy was the one leading the routine, right? Because he's trying to say, well, what makes you the professional? Why can't I be the professional? Just because my body moves differently doesn't mean that I'm any less, you know, able to dance, right? So just challenging that idea of like authority figures and normal dance, like normal movement, etc. And so this was like the entrance to my show, this video, and I just loved, you know, people can come into the space, they saw it, everything was dark, and then they go through those doors behind those screens there, and then you go into the rest of the show. So it was a really nice kind of entrance to the topic that I was trying to do here. There's so many other examples here, but I'm conscious of the time. I'll just show you a couple more quick ones. This one here is where you have to, this is me again, but you have to kind of strap yourself into a seatbelt kind of thing. And then you end up like rotating around in a 360-degree circle around and around and around. And along the way on your path, you find various barriers, you know, various things that come into your way. Like this man here has to step over this concrete block. And so the point of it is like, it's kind of like a symbol for how disabled people have to constantly make adjustments to their movements, because the world we live in, the architecture, the environment is never made for us. Like it's always, like for me personally, whenever I go grocery shopping, I have to like climb up the shelves, or I have to ask someone to help me because I can never reach everything, right? So things are not made for us. And so we need to adapt constantly. And so this is supposed to get the visitor to like it's like, let's put yourself in my shoes, basically, for one day or 5 minutes and see what you need to do, and that everybody needs to adapt in some way. This was like probably my favorite installation in this show, because in the background you can see this artist Wendy Jacob decided to pretend that there was a basketball court. And so at the opening, we actually invited the Canadian Paralympic basketball team to come and play basketball and pretend that they were playing basketball in this court right here. And it was so cool because Wendy, the artist, see this platform back here, underneath it's full of subwoofers and other sound equipment. And so she recorded these guys playing, like you hear the sounds of them playing and like the bounce, bounce, bounce of the ball. And then when you sat there, these people are sitting there, you could actually feel the vibrations underneath you of the ball. It was just really beautiful. And so she's made it accessible for deaf people like the sounds of the men playing basketball. And so, by the way, this artist is the same one that did the cat purring piece from my other show. So I've worked with her a lot, and she's like a real expert on vibration. Well, then what I'll do is just quickly tell you that for all my shows as a curator, I always now do websites, because I used to do catalogs. You know, I love catalogs, and I think they're great documentation for shows, but they're also not very accessible to people that might be blind or have low vision. They're also financially not very accessible because they can be expensive. So why not do a website? And then the website is, you know, you can make adjustments to a website if you use a screen reader. See this little button up here, it says show display preferences. So if you click on that, you can actually change the settings of your website. You can change the style, the size, the line, you know, whatever you need so that you can see it better. And so this woman who designed my website, she's disabled. So she understands the needs of disabled users. And I've hired her now for all my, you know, whenever we have the money, we hire her to make a website for all my shows. And it's really nice to be able to do that. I know I'm skipping over some things, but I'm trying to also cover a lot in a short space of time. Okay, so this show I did was about, you know, trying to challenge the myth of deaf people, like that, because people assume that deaf people live in a silent world, which is completely false, because they have still experiences of sound through vibration, and also just through other means too, you know, physical cues, etc. So that's what this show is about. And I think the thing that I want to focus on especially is the show traveled to 2 different places. First, it started at Cal State Fullerton, and then it went to UCSD. But the thing that is most important about the show is the access points. These are all like samples of the work. And by the way, I'm going to circulate my PowerPoint so that you can see the images in more detail later on if you would like to. But what I wanted to say was that we felt that it was really important to offer American Sign Language curators tour in American Sign Language. And so this particular gallery didn't have the funding. So I hired the ASL interpreter myself. She's right here. And then I gave the tour of the show, and my husband came and took his cell phone, and he took, you know, the recording, and then we uploaded the file onto an iPad so that people who were deaf could access the video. So it was really important that we did that too. And then when the show went to UCSD, they have more resources there. They have like a professional recording studio. And so we had the ASL interpreter come and sit in the recording studio and do the sign of and there's me in the corner, and I'm just talking about the show, and she's translating what I'm saying into sign language. So it's important, like even this size difference is really important, because here we're now saying that it's the ASL interpreter that is the most important aspect of this access. This is a show that I did a couple years before this pandemic hit us. And it was a show that I thought was really fun. It was all about, again, disabled movement. But the big and interesting work from this for me, oh, here's the website again. Let me just show you this one really quick. Here's the website, and see how in that corner it says show display preferences. So again, you're able to make those changes to your website. But the big work I wanted to show you is this one. So this artist, her name is Claire Cunningham. She is from Scotland, and she uses, this is her, she uses these crutches to move around and to walk on a daily basis. And she's very interested in Elvis Presley. She said, you know what, Elvis Presley is, you know, remember, I'm sure you guys know this, but you know, the way that he used to sing and dance, he would like swivel his hips. And so this is like a clip from Jailhouse Rock. And so all the ladies would scream and go crazy when he did that, of course. But Claire said that she felt like he actually, like the way that he would move his body like that is actually kind of influenced by disabled people and the way that disabled people move, and usually in a very uncontrollable way, right? And so she thought, well, what would happen if I became Elvis, and would that make my body movements more acceptable because I'm pretending to be Elvis? So she was like questioning, like, and then, you know, lots of people try and impersonate Elvis too, right? So it's like, when do you draw the line? Is it Elvis Presley actually being flattering towards disabled people, or is it offensive? Like he's mocking them. So she was trying to like play with those questions in her performance work, which I thought was really interesting. And this is like the installation, and we had the Elvis costumes. There she is again performing as Elvis with her crutches. And then we had a karaoke set up in the gallery, and we asked visitors to put on the cape as well, and they had the microphone and they were singing Elvis Presley songs. So that was kind of like the more fun component of these questions, that very serious questions that she was asking about, you know, what is kind of considered acceptable when you're trying to imitate somebody else, you know. And then this is a show that I did earlier this year, also in Canada. And so in this one, I was looking at basically how the environment, both the natural environment and the man-made environment, the built environment, is one that can be very toxic to disabled people. And so all of these artists are making work about their illnesses. And this was created during the pandemic era, right? Our pandemic moment. And so unfortunately, the pandemic has made us realize that we're all vulnerable to illness and sickness. And a lot of us have become disabled through this process of the COVID-19. For worse, it has made museums and galleries more aware of disability, because more of us are sick. And so also more of us have to make our resources available in a digital format, because not all of us can come in person. And so literally here we are on Zoom today. Like Zoom has really changed our lives. You know, most of my teaching my students now I'm doing on Zoom still. So it's really, you know, in a way, this has become a better thing for disabled people. But it also makes it harder because there's still access components that still need to be met. Anyway, so this is kind of like, you know, the point of this show is just talking about illness, and you know, here's an installation of a pillow, and these are like filters that the artist has used to smoke joints to help alleviate her pain and discomfort. This is a quilt, a medical quilt. And the artist has put all kinds of like medicines and different kinds of ailments that she uses to make herself feel better as well. So all the artists have different kinds of sicknesses. Some of them are immunocompromised. And this show really looks at kind of disability, not just through a kind of physical disability, but also through like a wider lens of illness and sickness. So these are just the different installation shots. And also just how the natural environment, believe it or not, is disabling too. Like, you know, the way that, I mean, the medical industrial complex on the one hand, but, you know, even something simple, like if a disabled person wants to go to a park, like a nature reserve, normally it's inaccessible to them because of the roads or the stairs or the, you know, whatever it is, it's not accessible. Okay. These ones are pillows that are filled with medical ephemera. So inside is actually needles and empty pill bottles, things like that. And we have to be really careful with installing these you know, the installer had to be careful that he didn't, you know, hurt himself. And this work here, Ezra, he's really kind of aware of my own thinking around touch. And so with these, he has these beautiful drawings in the background on the wall, and he wanted to make them 3D and tactile friendly. So that's why he made this rug of the same shapes of the drawings. And so people would come in and like rub the rug, and it feels very calming and very relaxing. And also this one here, this is an artist who made a journal of her daily pain. She was like recording her experience with her body. And she made a tactile, like a raised platform, like a raised surface. So you could feel the journal more or less, which I thought was really nice. This one here on the left, I want to show you too. So see this chair? It's like the chair that elderly people or disabled people use when they take a shower. And so what Ezra did was he put that in there, but also he put in a big massage wand. And so he invited visitors to come in and use it. So you could use it on your back, or, you know, use it wherever you want to feel comfortable. And so he was kind of breaking boundaries too, because you don't normally go to a gallery and, you know, put a massage wand on yourself. So he was kind of trying to challenge the idea of like, you know, private and public, you know, like what do we feel comfortable doing in public? Anyway, so these are different works from different artists, and I don't have time to go into them right now, but you know, please go to my website also, by the way, which has extensive, you know, information about all of these works. And this is the show that's up right now at SDSU Art Gallery. It's called Script Rescript. So there's me with one of the artists is Bhavna Mehta. She's in her wheelchair. The show just opened a couple of weeks ago, and then there was a story in the Union Tribune. Then there was another story on KPBS. And so the show was really about this idea of script rescript. So when we go to the hospital or the doctor, we get given a script, right, for like medication or whatever it is we need. And so the idea is here, the artists are rewriting the script that they've been given. So refusing the information that you're being told in a way, or a way of like making yourself feel better when maybe the doctors don't make you feel so great, right? Like sometimes we go to the hospital, the doctors are not the warmest people, like they can be maybe cold, unfriendly. And so here artists are trying to embrace their own medical conditions that make them feel comforted. And so literally what you're looking at here is x-rays. And Bhavna decided to use embroidery and beads to create beautiful patterns over the x-rays. Here's some installation shots from the show. And see, here's Bhavna's work again. These x-rays mounted to the wall, and you can see that the artist has used beautiful beads and embroidery. And it's just more empowering, you know, when you see these images of your body, it can be maybe unsettling, right? Especially x-rays. And so she, you know, makes them become more personal. This one I really like because she called this circle a topography. So she said, this is the landscape of my body. And it's really beautiful and poetic. And here, see this little thing on the side? This is a touch sample. So she didn't want people to touch this circle, the big piece. So she said, I'll give people a sample of what that feels like, the embroidery. So I really liked that she did that for visitors too. I'm just going back here. So, okay, so just a couple more pieces to share with you. These are like really large paintings, collages. And Catherine Sherwood, the artist, decided to basically appropriate images of the reclining nude throughout art history. And she's decided to make them a different skin color. So this woman is now Black, and they're also disabled because there's a prosthetic arm. And she also put the faces. These are actually brain scans because Catherine had a stroke. And so when the doctors took these brain scans of her, she said, I'm going to put them in my art. So that's what you're looking at right there. Okay, so it's a literal rescript as well of art history, but of her own body too. So hopefully you're all getting the idea of what's going on here. Okay, this probably is one of my favorites too. This is Dominic Quaglozzi. These objects, they're called transformers. And the material is actually hospital gowns, which I love. And so what he's done is created these little arms off the sides of this canvas, and you can come, the visitor can come and actually move these little arms and create shapes. Have you guys ever heard of transformers, like the toy that the little boys use, and they make different shapes? So that's why he called them transformers. Here is actually my nephew changing it in the gallery. So we hung them really low so that people could come and engage with them. I think this video is still working. Yeah, shows you how you can change them around. And it's really fun to do. And the idea is because Dominic, the artist, has cystic fibrosis, and he has had to have so many surgeries in his life. He had to have a lung transplant. He did all this stuff. And so he said his body has felt like a transformer, because people come in, they rip things out of him. And so this for him is a way of symbolically feeling like more control of a body where that has been manipulated very heavily by doctors and surgeons. Okay, so it's a really beautiful poetic work as well. All right, and it's also because he's sharing it with others in a public gallery, which I think is really nice. So this is the last work. This work is really great. It's called Kelp Help, and you can see it's suspended from a bit from the ceiling. And what's really neat about this work is that the woman who made it, Sandy Yee, she was born with just 2 fingers on each hand and 2 toes on each foot. And so if you look closely, it's probably really hard to tell, but see these the ends of the kelp have like this? That's actually the shape of her hand, 2 fingers on each hand. And so all of these little kelps are her hands, actually. And so she's trying to say that my hands are natural too. So even though you might look at them and think that's strange or weird or whatever you might think, you'll be, maybe look at her and think how different she is. She's also trying to equate it with nature and to say that all our bodies are natural. It's just that society defines our bodies through a hierarchy, right? A system.